Hello there and welcome to The Bunker. I'm Lloyd Evans and today I have the privilege of speaking to two fellow ex-Jehovah's Witnesses who, like me, have spent time as elders. I think it's fascinating to learn more about elders and what elders are responsible for. And one way that we can do that, of course, is by speaking to people who have had that experience. To that end, I'm delighted to be joined by Beau, who is joining us from Maine, and Mike, who is joining us from Utah. Beau and Mike, thank you so much for joining us.
It's great to be here.
Thanks for having me.
I hope you don't mind me disclosing your vague location. I haven't cleared that with you in advance, but presumably you can't be hunted down.
They can hunt me down very easily. People know who I am, what I was, and where I live, so I'm fine.
You're waiting for them, I assume.
I actually live in Massachusetts, and in case somebody does want to track me down, I actually live in Massachusetts, and I'm just in Maine hiding out.
Okay, you're at an undisclosed location.
Undisclosed location.
Fantastic. Of course, once upon a time, you chaps would have been involved in hunting people down to varying degrees, and we will get into that. But I thought perhaps first we could just get a summary of your Jehovah's Witness experience. So who wants to go first?
Go ahead, Mike.
Okay, I was born in 1961 into a large extended family of Jehovah's Witnesses. My dad's parents first got the message before World War II. I think it was 1934, something like that. And their kids became witnesses. My dad and mom had 6 kids. And my younger brother left when he was quite young. He left when he was 16. But I married a wonderful witness girl, young, and sort of quickly moved through the ranks of the organization. I was appointed as a ministerial servant in, I think, 1984, 85, and I was appointed as an elder in 1991 at the age of 30. I served in a congregation in New England, pretty close to where Beau is right now. And then in 2000, I moved my family to Asia for a business opportunity. So I served as an elder in Taiwan and then later as an elder in Macau. Because I started having really significant doubts in the early 2000s, I sort of tried to plug along. By 2004 or so, I just knew it wasn't true. But I continued to serve as an elder until 2009, at which point I went to the body and said, I've got issues and I can't serve anymore. And I just kind of refused to talk about it. They pressed me a little bit and I kind of held my ground, and ultimately they said, fine. And then I disassociated from the group in 2012.
It's interesting how there's a little bit of crossover in the dates that I'm looking at, because you mentioned that you became an elder in 1991. That was the year after I got baptized. Wow. You stood down as an elder in 2009, which was the same year I stood down as an elder, albeit I'd only served 1 year, whereas you'd served quite a number of years. Yeah. And it was in 2013 that I disassociated, and you disassociated, I think, the year before. So some commonalities there. And Beau, what's your story?
Yes. Okay, third generation Jehovah's Witness. So my grandparents essentially converted. My parents were more or less raised in that very young ages. They became witnesses. And then myself and my 2 siblings obviously were born in for that reason. I was baptized at age 11, pretty young. Started out zealous, auxiliary pioneering in the summer, things like that. Hit the teenage years, obviously rough patch. I say I did just enough to have a ton of guilt and shame, but still die a virgin. But those are my teenage years. But I decided at age 19 to do penance for all that, to do a turnaround, U-turn, and get my life right with Jehovah. So I moved into a new congregation, and I just threw myself into it. Immediately signed up for regular pioneering. Within a couple of months, I was a ministerial servant. And then following that, I started getting pressure to go to Bethel because I had a friend in the congregation that was going to be, had put in his application, was going to Bethel. And so that's what I did. I went to Bethel temporarily, and I ended up going permanent for 6 years at Wallkill Bethel. And then I met my ex-wife and left Bethel, and we began regular pioneering together. And within the first several months of marriage, I was appointed an elder. So this was around age 26. And I was in the Spanish congregation the whole time, Spanish circuit. I switched in Bethel. So I was just an elder. I described my experience as an elder as just feeling like drowning. Just the more I worked, the more work they stacked on top of me. I wish I could say I had some fantastic doubt or interesting reason for waking up, but really it was pornography, which I confessed to, and I was removed as an elder and lost all my privileges, which were so numerous at that point that, it was almost a relief in a way. But just sitting at the meetings, listening, almost like your story with kind of being in a foreign language hall. It's like all I could do was sit at the meeting and think and really listen to what was being said. And it was kind of like I got unplugged from all the duties I was carrying out. And then I started waking up at that point, just by nature of the things I was hearing and seeing. With kind of a peaceful mind, just resting there, actually thinking about things.
That's fascinating. I can definitely relate to that, because although I feel as though it was moving to a non-English speaking country that was the main factor in my waking up, I also think there's something to be said for the fall from grace factor. And the fact that it's kind of like snakes and ladders. You've taken a long tumble down a snake and wound up near the start of the board, and with so much work ahead of you to get back to where you were, that's maybe a good point at which, in your mental process, you start thinking, well, is it worth the effort? And is it worth investing this time? Am I really in the truth? I think there was definitely an element of that in my own story. Would that be fair for you? Yeah, of course. And it's like that's an excellent point, because I remember I was privately reproved in my judicial committee. And when they made the announcement, Beau is no longer an elder, Beau is no longer, I'll give my last name, hopefully that's okay. Do you really want to track me down? Now it's out there. Social Security number's coming. He's no longer an elder, no longer a regular pioneer. There was an audible gasp in the audience of people. It was like, it was the most humiliating experience for me that I can remember, of just like being so public in the organization and then taking such a hard fall all the way down to where people didn't even want to talk to me anymore. Now, one thing I'm kind of interested to learn about, and to an extent, you cross over into another area, Beau, with your story, because we try and alternate in this series between elders and Bethelites. You're both an ex-elder and an ex-Bethelite. So it's interesting to kind of bring that element in as much as possible. But primarily, let's talk about what being an elder means. And perhaps if I can start with family expectations and congregation expectations. Mike, to what extent did those factor into your pursuit of the position of elder?
I can't say that expectations of other people drove my pursuit of helping others in the congregation whatsoever. It seemed like the right thing to do. It seemed like I had the circumstances and maybe some natural ability to be a good listener. And once people figure that out, it feels like you're doing the right thing. It feels like you're providing people with something that's really important to them. And it goes not just from public speaking at different kingdom halls or at conventions, but even more so on the personal level, either with shepherding calls, or if someone really seems like they wanted help during a judicial hearing. It felt like just the right way to help people. So nobody ever pushed me into it. Nobody ever said, oh, Mike, you've got these abilities, you've got circumstances, you need to reach out, you need to do more. I never really experienced that.
Can you speak to that, Beau, or was it slightly different for you?
I think it was slightly different for me. I think for me, it was, I was almost like, for Mike's sounds so much better than mine, but for me, it was like I was just kind of like on this trajectory, almost like on a board game, where it's just like, this is the next space you're going to move to. And people were, in my case, talking to me about it. You had a certain expectation, a certain age, kind of, we were looking to be thought of as an elder. And, people kind of asking about it, kind of, my friends would call me from Bethel, hey, the elder's been talking to you about it a little bit. So I felt like there was a little bit of pressure, but it just felt like it was kind of a natural progression in a way too. I did have a desire to help people. I think we all kind of, going off what Mike said, there was a desire there to help people, but I can't say that was 100% my motivation, and I can't say that was 100% pressured into it. It just was kind of almost, I was maybe a little more passive and just moving along with what the next move was, at least, to what it seemed to me.
To what extent do either of you feel the congregation looks upon the role of elder with a degree of kind of reverence and awe? Because particularly when it comes to arguing over child protection and that kind of thing, the organization tends to say, well, elders are just there to shepherd and provide pastoral support. It's a supportive role. It isn't so much a case of everyone looking up to the elders and feeling as though they need to follow every single suggestion that elders make. Where do you think the truth lies?
For me, I think it's probably somewhere in the middle. And I think it depends on the personalities involved. I was involved in a congregation in Asia where there were some very strong personalities, and they kind of asserted a strong position of authority. And because the people in that congregation were primarily from the Philippines, the Filipino sisters there, and I use that almost as a term of affection, they're just great people. They're very humble. They want to follow directions. So if they get somebody that's a bit assertive, then they get even more humble and kind of take whatever the elders say as just like law and really try to fulfill it. So they see them as an extension of the organization for sure. But if it's a strong personality, even if they assert their own opinions, rather than going strictly by the guidance from the organization, they will follow the leadership of those elders. That was my experience for sure.
I'm thinking about the recent JW Broadcasting episode where Stephen Lett put it this way. He said, if your elders tell you to paint the Kingdom Hall with a 2-inch paintbrush, irrespective of whether that's the most effective way to paint the Kingdom Hall, you should be painting it with the 2-inch paintbrush if that's what the elders are saying. So that kind of says everything in my view as to how much power elders have. Did you feel that kind of power, Beau, when you were an elder? I
have conflicted feelings about it a little bit too. It's not that I personally felt better than people as far as I can tell, or more powerful than them, but I did at the same time understand that my words and my actions had more weight than your average witness, for sure. Mike makes a great point. A lot of it does have to do with your personality, whereas if you are more authoritarian or more of a bully, and then you get that position, it's only gonna make those qualities come out even more. So I probably, I don't want to excuse myself. I'm sure I participated in exercising that power, you know, at times. I think you're just kind of, you feel like that's kind of the shepherding role is you're trying to steer people in a certain direction and move them. And I found that for the most part, yeah, when the average witness, well, if you're an elder, they're just going to kind of take your word for it, whether they like it or not, kind of like what Stephen Lett said. You know, I've saw people who really just did not like the council and told you they didn't like the council, but then they would just tell you at the end of the day they were going to do it anyways, just because it had come down from you and as an extension of Jehovah's organization.
I remember when I was an elder, one of the most jarring experiences of the whole thing, and for me it only lasted 12 months, but I'm still fairly traumatized by what happened in the course of that 12 months, because nothing prepares you, or at least in my case, nothing prepared me for the amount of politics that goes on, and the fact that everything immediately is revealed to be very man-made and very oriented around whose personality is the strongest and who is able to assert themselves over others. At least that was my experience. I don't want to put words in the mouth of you guys, but can you relate to any of that?
What prepared me for the politics as an elder was the fact that I'd been in Bethel, which is hyper politicized. You have people constantly, and I'm not saying everybody, but you have people within their brothers constantly, jockeying to work in a certain office or to work in a certain department, and they attach a lot of significance. And they had the expression Bethel heavy, so.
They use that expression inside Bethel, do they?
Inside Bethel, the expression is used, a Bethel heavy.
Oh, wow. Okay.
You'll hear someone say, "Oh, that guy's a heavy, so like straighten your tie," And so when I became an elder, for me, frankly, I was so used to the politics of the organization that I wasn't shocked by it for the most part, just because I witnessed so much of it at Bethel. That I just kind of knew that when you get a group of Jehovah's Witnesses together and there's positions available and arguments to be made, that politics are going to immediately come out.
Yeah, absolutely. I saw that in full effect in one of the Asian congregations that I was in. There was a particular elder who was very political. He actively engaged in trying to cover up wrongdoing. He had friends at the branch that coordinated our congregation. He actively tried to maliciously manipulate the makeup of the body of elders. And that was really the first time I had ever experienced it. And this congregation became really just a revolving door of people who would come in and try to help in the congregation. And he would really do everything possible to keep his control and his power over that congregation really at maximal levels. And I was never prepared for that because, frankly, the other congregations I served in, I never saw any of that. I had only served in 2 congregations, and they were great. Just good men doing things by the book, acting, with care and compassion. But boy, in that Asian congregation, I was just blindsided. I could not believe some of the stuff that went on there.
And I would imagine, Mike, particularly in your situation, I mean, what I love about this conversation is we get to hear Beau's comparison of his situation in Bethel, but you have also quite a unique experience. Number one, because of the number of years you served. I mean, you served for how many? Is it 14 years?
91 to 2009, almost like 18 years.
Sorry, 18 years.
Yeah.
So you've served a long time as an elder, and you've also served as an elder in 3 different countries.
Right.
By the looks of things. So is there any truth to the saying that the truth changes slightly from country to country?
In my opinion, hugely. it was almost like the last congregation that I served in was like an outpost on Mars. It was, yeah, it was quite bizarre. First time we went to a meeting there, the guys weren't wearing ties. And I'm sorry, that was in the field ministry. And of course, I'm wearing a tie, not a jacket, because it was very hot. And they're like, well, we don't wear ties here. And I said, well, I'm comfortable wearing a tie. It seems like that's how we've been trained. And that was just like the first thing. After that, there was just a lot of rules, a lot of politics, a lot of really stuff that I would describe then and today as just like unchristian.
It's hard to imagine like a totalitarian congregation that wants to go without ties. Usually it would be rigorously enforcing things in the other direction.
I can't believe Mike fought to wear a tie.
Yeah.
You're impinging on my right.
That's right.
Have you experienced any of that, Beau? The fact that it changes from place to place?
Oh, yeah, definitely. I had spent some time in the Dominican Republic to help build a Kingdom Hall project down there, and just seeing the difference in the kind of, just like Mike's saying, when you go to a congregation that's kind of in the countryside there, they have sometimes have their own rules and their own way of doing things. And at that time I was in Bethel, so I was very much kind of a stickler for all of that. And just like as an example, I hadn't given a public talk at that point, I don't think. And when I visited the congregation, they said, "Oh, you're from Bethel, so why don't you just give the public talk this Sunday? And maybe we'll do a special program with you too." And I said, "Well, I'm not a Bethel speaker." And they said, no, that's fine. And I said, "I don't have a talk outline." And they said, no, that's fine. We'll give you one. Just prepare it for the weekend. And I said, "But it hasn't been okayed by my elders for me to give a public talk as a ministerial servant." And they said, "Don't even worry about it. We don't care. Like, you're a Bethelite. We just want you to give this talk." So they were kind of operating just on their own, as a small example, their own set of instructions, and not really, didn't care that much. And I mean, the meeting probably ran 45 minutes over time that night. And they cut like one or two parts out of the meeting because it just, to me, it was like mind blowing. Just 'cause I was like, oh, I can't, like, what's happening here? So yeah, I've definitely witnessed that. And even within, it happens within the States too, and within different language groups here too. There's definitely, there's interpretations taking place of the rules and the culture.
Yeah, it feels as though, and that really is a very human thing if you think about it, because the organization puts all sorts of apparatus in place to make sure there is total uniformity, total theocratic unity in the quote unquote brotherhood. So they have, branch committees, they have circuit overseers, who go out and it's really the job of the circuit overseer to make sure there is this unity. But almost inevitably, when you get individuals in a congregation who again have forceful personalities, the way things are done at congregation level will start to skew in favor of the personalities of of whoever happens to be in charge. And I think I've noticed that myself. And I've also noticed how different countries, it changes from congregation to congregation, and it also seems to change from country to country. I can remember when I arrived in Croatia, I was no longer an elder, but I think I felt as though I was being looked upon as someone who was working their way back to being an elder within the not too distant future. And I remember we had a circuit overseer's visit from someone who also, like me, was an MTS graduate. So we got to talking and comparing notes on MTS. And he said, "You know what, Lloyd?" He said, "You need to bear in mind that things are never going to be the same here in Croatia as they are in the UK. He said, "In the UK, there's more theocratic maturity than there is here in Croatia. In Croatia, we're not very mature theocratically." And I remember thinking, what an odd way to put it. But in a way, I can kind of understand what he meant. Because they weren't as settled everything was extremely rule oriented. It was like, this is what it says in the publications, therefore this is what we're going to do. And I can even remember, and this is my last anecdote because I'm talking too much already, but I love playing football. My team is Manchester United, and Manchester United have on their badge a little red devil. They're called the Red Devils. And so I decided as a gesture to buy all of the young ones in my team, in my congregation, Manchester United shirts. And one of them, his mother was stumbled by the fact that there was a devil on the badge, and she actually cut it out of the badge. Yeah. So this lad would turned up at the game the next week, and I was like, "What's wrong with your shirt?" So yeah, I think like, and that for me was this lack of, almost, I put it down to a lack of maturity. Really, though, it was just taking things seriously. Taking things the way they ought to be taken.
Yeah, and to pick up, if I can, on something that you just said. Where the circuit overseers are there to try to make sure that things are being done correctly, in the same congregation that I was served in Asia, it was like this. There was one particular very strong-willed man, and he would go out of his way to pander to the circuit overseer in just the most obvious ways. Like he would go around in the Kingdom Hall with an envelope, approaching every single person saying, the circuit overseer is coming, put money in the envelope. And he'd make sure that the circuit overseer had the best place to stay and took him out to nice meals at restaurants. And it was just like, it was so obvious that he's, trying to get on this circuit overseer's good side, maybe to compensate for some of the other stuff that was going on. It was really dirty.
Well, you can understand. I mean, there's clearly something wrong there when a circuit overseer is effectively being bribed, which is what it amounts to. I mean,
yeah, you're right.
I can remember sitting on Body of Elders meetings where our Kobe, I was there when it was switched from presiding overseer to Kobe, but let's say Kobe.
Sure.
He was saying, now, ordinarily, brothers, we would give the circuit overseer this much for his expenses. But I say we bump the figure up to, and then would be dramatically more. And I'm thinking, why? But now I look back, this particular individual, he was the one who was kind of pulling the strings in the congregation, and actually causing a lot of harm in the congregation by imposing his will on. He would go after, I write about it in my book, The Reluctant Apostate. He would go after people on very trivial things. I can remember one meeting, one of the, I'm just going to revert to some of my old language. One of the sisters ran out crying while her husband was on the platform, her husband being a ministerial servant. And I was perplexed as to why this was happening. What was so wrong about her husband being on the platform giving a talk? It was because her husband had recently been lectured by this Kobe because he bought a Range Rover, and the Kobe didn't like him having a new Range Rover and had given him a dressing down over it. And this had caused his wife to be upset seeing him on the platform for whatever reason. So that's the kind of bullying and politics that I'm referring to. I'm guessing you guys aren't a stranger to that.
No. After I left, I did some reflecting, and I realized really that I had worked at a McDonald's restaurant as a teenager, and we would get visits from a regional manager, and we had our local store managers. And before the regional manager would show up, you were mopping the floors and tucking in shirts and organizing the ketchup packets. And then they would leave. And then a few days later, everything would revert back to chaos. And I just realized that very much the Watchtower organization is just a franchise store. I think Knorr set it up like a corporation franchise. And that's why, so they put in district managers and regional managers and store managers, essentially. And everybody's playing these roles out to kind of appease the main corporation, you know, and it's just kind of, they're trying to enforce the order in on the congregation. But, you know, it springs back. And I think that's why they have to have these regular visits with the circuit overseer, because they're constantly trying to push people back into line, push the elders into line, then have the elders push the publishers into line. But it's you know, obviously it's a corporation. It's a series of franchises, really. You know,
yeah, I think that's a good illustration, Beau. And the thing that kind of always bothered me in congregations that I'll say weren't doing it right is that the customers, you know, the people who just show up every week, it's not like they don't know how things are supposed to be. So just like the customers of McDonald's, if they see ketchup packages all over the place, they know it's not right. And when they see like these loose cannons who are serving as elders trying to implement their own will rather than direction, it's like the publishers aren't getting what they signed up for. And that really did bother me. I
think one of the most impactful ways in which elders can negatively influence people. I mean, you know, we spoke earlier, Mike, you were saying about what motivated you to become an elder in the first place was to help people. If I'm thinking of ways in which elders don't help people and in fact cause harm to people psychologically, it has to be through the judicial process for whatever reason. Now, in my 12 months as an elder, I now consider myself blessed to have never been involved in the judicial committee. I'm guessing, given the length of time that you guys served, that you can't say the same.
Yeah, lost count.
Yeah,
I mean, not dozens. I mean, just in some cases, dozens a year. Yeah.
And does that give you any? Do you ever look back on any particular cases and cringe at the way it was handled?
Oh, I do now. But at the time, it feels like you're doing the right thing. I mean, you try to be compassionate. You try to use scriptures that you're trained to use. But, you know, particularly with people who were struggling with same-sex or sexual identity issues, it's like you're trying to use a philosophy from the Stone Age to help people today. And I didn't see it at the time. But now I think how those people must have suffered under the counsel that they were getting, particularly those cases. Yeah, it bothers me now, even today.
Yeah. My first year as an elder, I sat on 7 judicial committees. Almost all of them were about sex and almost all of them were with females. I found the experience traumatizing every time, even as a mentally ill elder. I would go home so depressed by what had taken place. The discomfort level for me was unbearable. I was quiet for the most part. I was also a new elder, so I wasn't super assertive. But I would just sit there quiet, not able to make eye contact with the person across the table from me, just because I found the whole thing so shameful, frankly, that the questions that were being asked and how inappropriate they were. And I, again, mentally in, but I just realized that this is not good. And I definitely have some serious regrets about just even being an accomplice in a way by just sitting in the room while that was taking place.
Do you feel that because we hear anecdotally stories, particularly involving women, where they feel very much as though, well, first of all, there's an imbalance because they're being judged over by a kind of a kangaroo court that's entirely comprised of men. But you quite often hear that in these situations, it's almost as though the elders are deriving some sort of sexual gratification from being able to interrogate a woman on very intimate matters. Do you feel that there was any element of that in your experience?
For me, I didn't. And as soon as I started serving on committees, it was pretty quick that I would be handed committees to be the chairman. And I was kind of sensitive to that because, you know, when you have to figure out, well, was it uncleanness or loose conduct or pornea, then if the person didn't say right off the bat what happened, I would kind of do my level best to prevent the need from saying, okay, well, where were your hands? And, you know, I don't want to get graphic here. But sometimes what I would do is I would just say, you understand what the definition of pornea is, right? Is this a case where it was pornea? And in doing that, you shut off the potential or possibility of some of the other people on the body trying to probe with more intimate questions. So I was never in a situation where I got the sense that, boy, that, you know, these guys are really into hearing the gory details. I never heard
because you were the chairman.
And almost, yeah, I would say by the mid to late 90s, in nearly every, I said trial, inquisition that I sat in on, I would say in the vast majority, I was the chairman, yeah.
So you had an element of control in steering the conversation.
Yeah, and if I got that out first, then it cut the legs out of anybody else's need to say, oh, okay, well, let's talk about this more.
Mm. Beau, what was your experience?
My experience was obviously I can't say what was going on in their minds or their pants, but I mean, obviously it's all these designations that Mike just mentioned that causes the problem, a big, huge problem in the first place, because some elders feel like they need all these details to put a label like pornea or uncleanness, loose conduct, like, you know, sex is sex, but they put all these layers of sexuality or sexual acts. And so I felt like some of the elders went way too far in their questioning, completely inappropriate, asking for details. And I felt like I definitely saw that some of the women were traumatized by it. And I remember a case where we met with a young woman. The meeting was absolutely terrible. The questions that were asked were terrible. She was crying, sobbing uncontrollably, and the questions just kept coming. And then the elders decided they want to do a follow-up meeting with her, and she refused. She said, I am so ashamed. I am so ashamed. I cannot meet with you again. Please disfellowship me. Just disfellowship me, and I don't want to talk about anything else. And so I know that you know, those things, you try to make peace with that in your past and just kind of your own role and what took place. I was not the one asking those questions, but again, I don't claim I'm 100% innocent, because you know, you sit there, and sometimes I would mention to an elder after the meeting that he could reel it in a little bit. I remember a conversation I had with a new elder when I was still an elder. He just got appointed. He was in his mid-20s, and I sat down with him one evening and just told him that he needed to think for a really long time about the effect he could have, especially on a young woman's life, if he's in a judicial committee, just because that had stuck with me so deeply that I felt like I had to tell him, and just hope that he wouldn't, you know, at least even following the rule book, wouldn't traumatize people more than the Watchtower already does.
No, that's a horrible experience. That's awful.
Of course, when it comes to judicial committees, I think the mistake that sometimes can be made in the minds of the person who is the wrongdoer is that they think that there's an opportunity here to prove their innocence. But of course, once a judicial committee is convened, the facts of the matter in the minds of the elders are already settled. It's a case of simply establishing whether they're repentant or not. There's very little latitude for doing a total U-turn and saying, oh, actually, this didn't happen, because what you're then doing is admitting that the elders have made a mistake in organizing the judicial committee to begin with. So was there ever a judicial committee for either of you where you look back and think, no, they were actually innocent, that thing didn't actually happen?
Mike,
putting you on the spot here.
Yeah.
I'm trying to do the question justice, and there was so many. From my experience, the overwhelming majority of people that show up for a judicial meeting are there because they did it, they want to confess, and they want help. So I've heard of cases where people were like called before a committee because maybe somebody else said they saw them doing something, and then there really had to be like an investigation, interrogation, that whole thing. But I don't think I was ever involved in anything like that.
Yeah, I would say the same thing. I don't ever, if everything, every judicial committee I sat on, supposedly what we had met for had happened. I didn't have one where it just, where it was a complete, actually that didn't happen and let's just throw out the case.
Okay. I'm just interested because when you read the Shepherd book, it's again a foregone conclusion that this has happened, and in my mind, I can imagine scenarios in which it hasn't happened. So I'm just interested to see.
What I can tell you is that I was involved in several cases where, because of the two-witness rule, judicial meetings were not held. So it may fall into that where there was plenty of smoke and the person probably did it, but denied it, and you've only had one person who saw it happen. And then,
Well, this was going to be my next question.
Yeah.
Now that you've mentioned the two-witness rule, obviously the most notorious area in which the two-witness rule causes problems is in the area of child protection and predators. Did either of you have the misfortune to be involved in that sort of situation?
Yes.
Right. Okay.
It was awful. Because nobody else was in the room. I don't know what happened, but this guy's got his name in the paper. And I was the guy that was assigned to give a local needs talk about how you can't believe everything in the paper. Oh. And I came to his defense. I mean, obviously I didn't use his name, but everybody knew who we were talking about. He was a guy in our congregation. Serious accusations against him. Child Protective Services were looking into it. He had not been arrested, but somehow the paper got a hold of it, and it was my job to get up there and say, we don't know what we don't know. Don't trash this brother's reputation. Yeah.
Please tell me that because it got into the papers that he eventually got convicted.
I don't think he did. A kid was taken out of the house. It was a foster kid. I believe the kid was taken out of the house, but I don't recall him ever being prosecuted.
And was that a reporting issue? If he'd been reported, would he perhaps have been prosecuted or?
Not sure. Not sure.
I didn't sit on any judicial committees for child sex abuse, but obviously you usually, as an elder, you're informed of who you're on watch with in the congregation, who's been labeled predatory. My first congregation had 3 people that had been labeled predatory. I was assigned as an elder to keep an eye on them, counsel them if I saw anything that fell out of line of them hugging a child or anything like that. But as far as the authorities getting involved, I'm not 100% sure, but I'm highly doubtul it happened. The second congregation I was in, wow, this is hard to say, but there was someone who had been labeled by the organization as a sexual predator and worked as a school teacher. And the elders knew that he was both a school teacher and a sexual predator, and didn't go to anybody to warn the school system or anything. So, and then finally the authorities caught up with him, but it wasn't because of any help from the Watchtower. So that was something that again, I'm ashamed to say it because I was in the congregation with that knowledge along with the body of elders, and I didn't, take it upon myself to do anything, but, it's that keeping things in-house mentality. It just, it's terrible. It causes so much harm. And in that case, that if he had been reported, it could have saved a lot of harm that took place to children.
Beau, that's the thing that I find so maddening. And if you think about it, the only thing that the organization would have to do anytime there's a charge or a report of childhood sexual abuse, all they would have to do is say, what you were reporting, what you were asserting is a crime. Call the police. We're not lawyers. We can't help you adjudicate this. Go to the police. They'll help you with the crime part of this problem. We'll help you with the spiritual hurt part of this problem. It would be like dead easy for them to do that, and yet they won't do it.
So we have a situation, Mike, where you've given a talk in front of a congregation and told them, there's nothing to see here, folks, move along. And at the same time, in the newspapers, this guy is being highlighted as being a danger to children. Since that whole thing happened, have you had any impulse to report this individual to the authorities? And if not, is there a reason why you've not been able to do that?
Well, like I said a little bit earlier on, this case that ended up in the paper was being investigated by Child Protective Services. And they had information about the case that we did not have. They interviewed people. I believe there was a non-witness living in the same home. And by the time, or when I gave that talk, no charges had been pressed. And since then, I don't know if he was ever prosecuted or not, but when I left that region to serve in another country, until then, he had not been prosecuted. So the talk that I gave was more related to don't believe every charge that's in the paper. We don't know all the facts.
So it wasn't a situation that you were actively involved in covering up. It was more a case of there's an individual who's receiving media scrutiny on this. Let's ignore the newspapers. Yeah,
exactly right. Treat this guy like a brother because we don't know what happened.
And you must feel crappy at taking that stance on the platform in front of a congregation. Obviously, your mind was not your own at the time, but does that make you cringe when you look back on that whole episode?
It makes me cringe now, but at the time, I felt like, the body picked the person that could do the best job defending this brother against a potentially false charge. So, I mean, there's so many things, Lloyd, that we don't... That we can't imagine we would have been involved in. And then when we look back at it, it's like, ugh.
Just believing the whole thing to begin with.
Yeah,
we hate ourselves that we were duped.
Yeah, there's that.
Yeah, indeed. Okay. You've already walked us through your stories. I'm just wondering whether you can just revisit what it was like to finally no longer be an elder and what impacts that had on your mental health, for the better or for the worse.
Yeah, well, as I kind of mentioned earlier too, I don't want to repeat myself too much, but it was kind of like that hard fall we talked about. And it was just like I had slammed on the brakes and gone to the windshield. That's how I felt emotionally, psychologically. All of my, not all of it, but most of my self-worth was wrapped up in my privileges. And I had a lot of them. I think I counted this out with a friend. I probably had 14 different titles or, privileges as an elder in the congregation. A lot of those were simultaneous, at the same time. And so when all that stopped and I couldn't even comment at the meeting, I couldn't give talks, people stopped looking at me as someone that could give them good advice or help them. It took a huge toll on me. Also, my ex-wife's hopes and dreams within the organization were tied to the fact that she was married to an up-and-coming kind of young superstar elder. I hate to even use the words, but that's kind of the mentality. And so it was devastating on a couple of different levels. really just, I went through a serious depression. I was suicidal. I had actually written out suicide notes for my family and my wife because I knew I was going to confess to the elders and everything was going to end for me. And I thought I would end my life too. So it was devastating. Ultimately, my marriage didn't survive the blow of everything. Just so it was a hard road for sure. And I just think that in the organization, unfortunately, a lot of time your self-worth and your self-confidence and the way you feel about yourself is tied up with your position within the organization or how you're viewed by those in the organization. And so when their opinion of you automatically gets lowered tenfold and just by one announcement, it's just, for me, it was like, I wasn't useful anymore. I wasn't a useful human anymore. I didn't have anything to offer anybody anymore. So that's that was what I had going on mentally and psychologically, because my waking up came afterwards. So I was still very much mentally in when I felt the blow of all that. And it wasn't until I woke up mentally that I was actually able to reestablish myself as a person, and create my own sense of identity.
And I'm so glad you were able to do that, because that, you've described being in a very dark place. Mm-hmm. And it's awful to go through that experience of kind of self-loathing and feeling as though you're doomed if Armageddon were to strike. I really do sympathize for Poe. He's physically out, mentally in. Mm-hmm. So I'm so glad you were able to come out of that. And Mike, what's it been like for you since?
It was a huge relief when I finally stepped down, because I had served for 5 years knowing with 100% confidence that it wasn't true. And I would say by, sometime 2005, 2006, I believe then and I believe now that the position of agnostic atheism is probably the most defensible position. And I had come to that and yet was still serving as an elder. And I did so because I felt the need of the publishers in that small congregation. And I mean, this sounds awful, but I still did a good job. And I couldn't figure out how to get out. And I felt like, I know I'm going to have this weight off my shoulders, but at the same time, these people are going to be really disappointed. But I got through that, and just being able to live an honest life, despite the fact that, some of these people are still hurting, they still miss me, but, I've only got one life to live, and I'm living it.
Do you think you might have been somewhat institutionalized by your role as an elder, Mike?
I don't think so. I don't think so. Because even when I was serving as an elder while being an atheist, I focused on the pragmatic, practical ways that certain scriptures could make people's lives better. And if I knew that the hope was real for them, I knew the scriptures that I could use to help them. I mean, this sounds so bizarre, but that's really what happened.
You were able to rationalize at the time, despite no longer believing, that you were nevertheless in a position to, for whatever reason, make people feel better.
Right.
By giving them basically a pill that doesn't do anything. Can't think of my words now.
Placebo.
Placebo, that's the one. Well, that's really helpful to hear. And in fact, we're coming to the end of our conversation now. This is about all we have time for. But I think we've covered a lot of ground in this conversation. And hopefully viewers will know a lot more as a result of what you've both shared about what it means to be a Jehovah's Witness elder and what this position is really all about behind the scenes. I guess before we conclude our conversation, are there any kind of inspirational words you have to share with the viewers?
We haven't really talked about the reasons that we left, or what convinced us that it wasn't true. And I guess I would just leave with a couple points. Jehovah's Witnesses present a pretty nice hope, but they don't have the answers to the most important questions in the universe. In fact, their entire worldview when it comes to how humans ended up on the earth, the whole flood account, it's just wrong. I mean, it's not even wrong. It's like an answer to a completely different question. So if there's people who believe that that have doubts that this might not be true, don't let the nice hope cloud your mind to ignoring the reality of what is easily discoverable about the planet on which we live and the universe in which we live. In my opinion, we've only got one life to live. And if people are scared to leave because it might be true, it's not. I didn't make it untrue. I just discovered it's untrue. And that's why I left.
Well said. And Beau?
I would just say that this is going to start out very inspirational, but hopefully we'll get there in just a second. The price for your freedom is so high when you leave. Losing family, losing lifelong friends, it feels like a loss of everything. But the freedom you gain after leaving and the people you're able to meet and connect with, and just to be able to live life openly, with an open heart and an open mind, and to be able to take in any knowledge you want, to be friends with whoever you want to be friends with, so on and so forth. It's like, you're in the organization and your life is colored by numbers. And now you have this blank canvas and you can just paint whatever you want with it. And you don't have to stay inside the lines anymore. You don't have to use a certain color. It's up to you. And you can be terrified by that prospect at first, but once you embrace just that freedom, I am in such an insanely happy and peaceful place in my life now that I would just encourage anyone else just to, I know it's hard. I know it's heartbreaking. And yes, I have sad moments. I grieve the loss, but there's so much you gain too. So it's worth the effort. It's worth looking into things. And that's why I would say just, once you're able to grieve it and you can kind of embrace your own life, it's just, in my mind, there's nothing more beautiful than that.
Well said, Beau. And
Nice.
Again, I'm so glad that you were able to come out of that dark place and find your bliss, find your freedom. And that's what this is all about, isn't it? So hopefully by hearing your experiences, my viewers, particularly those who still hold the candle for this being God's organization, will understand that it really isn't. It really is just a man-made organization that you want to get out of as quickly as possible. But gentlemen, thank you so much for sharing your time with me and with my viewers. Viewers, I hope you've enjoyed this conversation. Don't forget to subscribe to the Lloyd Evans channel for more such videos. And as always, thank you for watching.